Thank you, everyone, for listening. I am Jessica Motter, your host for the Empowering Freedom podcast, the author of Love Life, Be Life, Share Life book, and a brand ambassador with 3. I'm so excited to have you here with us today. I'm interviewing Ken Coleman, and Ken and I were just catching up. I was checking out his profile and the things he had going on. I'm from the Midwest. Ken is now in California. We were talking about our Midwest opportunities and all of that. So Ken, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Being in California, this is great. You know, such a change from Missouri. And I got to go to the beach yesterday and it was heaven. I loved it.
Yes. I love it. I love the beach. The beach is my happy place. That's for sure. For sure. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about you, your story. What types of things you're working on right now, what projects you're working on, events, things like that.
You bet. Well, I grew up in Missouri, Southwest Missouri, and or Missouri, however you say it. But I grew up there, and I became a realtor at the age of 19, which was very young in the state. In fact, on my birthday, the earliest I could become one, I became a real estate agent, and been in real estate my entire life. And I love it. I love helping people get into the properties. It's their dreams. And I've went on to be a broker, and 45 years of being in the real estate industry. And I did many other things along the way. I was a major part of a little town called Branson, Missouri, a growing Branson. And it was a big tourist town. So I was involved with many of the theaters there. I helped Mel Tillis get into his theater, and Andy Williams and the Osmond brothers and Mickey Gilley and an awful lot of the kind of the old time has-been entertainers. And that's what Branson was kind of known for. But it was a great resting place for a lot of them after they had gone, been highly successful, and they could just rest in one place and not have to travel all over the country, and people would come to see them, their followers. So that was fun to get to know that group and work with them. And there was many of them. I don't know. I can go on and on, but the fun of it. And Andy Williams was another one that I worked with and sold him his theater, and many of them I got to watch them build their theaters. So it was fun. But I was married for a long time to someone who couldn't travel within a 30-mile radius of Branson. And so one day I became single, and I couldn't travel enough. So I spent the next 6 years of my life driving all over the United States, left the real estate industry just to go live my passion of meeting people and becoming a true entrepreneur. And so I wrote 3 books during that time, got a 4th one coming out. And then I went and did 69 non-for-profit events across the United States. Actually took an active role in them in a girl outfit of all things, which is a whole story within itself. But I was promoting a product that I had invented, and also I wanted to bring joy to people at non-for-profits and be a part of that. And I invented a couple of products along the way, and then I started getting back into real estate, because you kind of get drawn back into that career you've been in all your life. So now I do speaking engagements on the books that I've written. And then I also back into doing real estate. I'll do roughly $800 million in real estate sales this year part-time. And so I can't say that I'm not in it anymore. Certainly I'm involved back in it. And then I have a podcast, and I'm a true entrepreneur. I'm involved in a lot of different things. Right. Also, raised 5 kids. So, wow. And, I have a number of grandkids, and they're all successful, and they're all in the marketing world, every single one of them. So,
really,
yeah. So that's awesome. Kind of my background's really marketing, I suppose, more than anything else. That's my passion.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like marketing is more like connecting with people, just ideas, creativity, just creating those relationships, and whether it's online or offline or, whatever it is, creating those relationships and all of that. So.
Yeah, I had a daughter. She owns her own marketing company now called Ish Marketing, and she was the director of marketing for XM Radio Golf Channel for a number of years. And she now is the director of marketing of a company I own called Focus on the 5. And when she was young, at the age of about 5, she said, "Dad, if you hadn't have done real estate, what would you have done different?" And I said, "Marketing." And so she heard that same story. She would ask it every night she went to bed. She'd say, okay, Dad, tell me about marketing. And so that was our bedtime stories, was talking about all the different companies that had been influenced from the marketing and ideas. And so she's an amazing marketer now, and she's definitely an outside the box thinker.
Awesome. That's great. That's so great. I love that. I love hearing stories like that, especially influencing the younger generations. My daughter is so much, my oldest daughter seems to be more like me as far as entrepreneurship. And she just had her first entrepreneurship start with Girl Scout cookies. So
Yeah,
it's so interesting. I didn't do Girl Scouts as a child, so I didn't really know that it was like so entrepreneurial based.
right.
But it is. That's what they're really focused on. So so anyway, it was just interesting. Her trying to, sell Girl Scout cookies, and she's driven. Like motivation is not an issue with her at all. So anyway.
That's fantastic. Well,
Yeah.
I wrote a book about that type of a child, and it's a book called Focus on the Five. And that book's based off the principle that 5% of the population are driven to be out of the box thinkers. They come by it naturally, and that they are people that just don't give up. They don't quit. When they set a task at hand, they just stay at it until they complete that task. And so it sounds like your daughter may be that kind of a person, but I have a granddaughter who's also in Scouts, and she just sold the Girl Scout cookies. And she had to have her own video that she produced, that she was asking people to buy the cookies, and she sold more than anybody else in the troop because her mother is the marketing person. So
right. Yeah, we
yeah.
did the same thing. I created a little video, we posted on social media. She actually sold more cookies that way than she did any other way. Right.
I love it.
A whole new market for, the Girl Scouts, I guess.
Yeah, it does. I think it really teaches a lot in the entrepreneurial world at a young age to get involved like that and see how it works and how the system works, and that you see some cookies sell better than other cookies, and then what power of suggestion sells more cookies than others, and it's so cool to see that at a young age.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I know. I was one of the volunteers at the Walmart, booth, and I was like, what they were saying, I was like, we say this, and like I was just trying to help coach them a little bit. I'm like, would you like Thin Mints, or would you like caramel delight, like lemonade, what, like trying to get them to, not just, do you want cookies, yes or
Sure.
say no, right, yes or no, right, but which kind would you like, how many boxes would you like, that type of there it was fun. It was really fun just to see
Yeah, scouting is such a cool area for kids today. And now in Boy Scouts, they don't call it Boy Scouts. It's just Scouts, and boys and girls both go to the same Scouts. And I have two grandsons real involved in Scouts, and they get to sell everything from hams to cookies and fruitcakes and different things. And it's amazing to watch them come alive, and they'll talk to me about really marketing, and then I'm sitting and listening to them. I'm thinking, wow, this is pretty cool, because grandpa didn't teach it to them. They're actually learning it on their own. So that's fun to see that. Yeah,
that's really cool.
That's cool. You're doing it with your daughter. I think that's a big thing, and a lot of times that doesn't happen. So I think that's cool.
Yeah, and it was really interesting too, because it showed like, what prizes you could get, right? So she picked out what prize she wanted. I just said, okay, so what do you want to, here's the prizes, and she picked what she wanted. I just said, okay, so let's talk about a plan for that. Like, what's your plan? And she started thinking of ideas. I mean, she's 6, thinking of ideas. And so I said, okay, let's do those ideas. And what about a video? So then we just started reaching out to people, and it was interesting to see, like, on the weekend, she'd be like, okay, let's go sell some cookies.
Yeah.
So she was really motivated. She wanted to have, it's the great thing about Kansas City is it's not exactly the warmest of temperatures, right, during cookie season. And so, I'm like, it's kind of cold outside to be outside going door to door, right? So let's be smart about this, and let's, do some messages to people and online and things like that. But yeah, it was good. It was fun for her. And so helping her get out of her comfort zone, and all of that. So Yeah. And then
I tell a
track
story
too.
in one of my books. Actually, I think I tell it in two different books because it was such an impactful story in my life. It's along the same line. There was a group that came to our school when I was 8 years old that said that they wanted to save Sesame Street. This was back in the day. Sesame Street had just began. And they said, look, we're going to have a contest and you're going to sell fruitcakes. Well, I didn't know what a fruitcake was, but it didn't matter to me. It was going to get a competition. I loved competition. So they said, yeah, whoever sells the most fruitcakes is going to get $500 cash. Back then was a lot of money, and a ping pong table and 2 bicycles. And it was just stuff that had been given away by different companies in town. And so I was very motivated to compete in this. And to tell a really long story and try to shorten it, I decided I was going to go after it with a passion. And I went out and I sold some fruitcakes and come running home to tell my mother. And when I got home, this was back in the day, an 8-year-old could go door to door in the neighborhood without mom and dad. But I came running back home and I had $80 I'd sold worth of fruitcakes. And I got home and pulled my pockets open and my money had fallen out of my pockets. I'd lost all the money.
Oh my
So
gosh.
I was so disappointed. And I told my father. My father said, well, here's what you're going to do. You're going to go back out tomorrow and you're going to resell more fruitcakes and you're going to tell the truth and ask for $1 more from every fruitcake so that you can make up for that. So I did. I worked all weekend, and sure enough, I sold enough fruitcakes to make up for the money I'd lost, and I sold more. But I was so proud of myself when it came out in the newspaper what position I was in sales in the town. It was in Wichita, Kansas, not too far from Kansas City.
Yeah.
And when the sales came out, I wasn't even in the top, 100 in town.
Right.
So I was so disappointed. I thought, oh my gosh, I've got to compete. I've got to figure out a way. So the next day, I figured out that I would go to downtown Wichita at 8 years old, and I get on a bus. My parents didn't know, but I got on a bus with 2 of my buddies, and we took a bunch of fruitcakes, and we went downtown Wichita. Got off the bus, and I had this bright idea that we'd get on the street corner and sell all those fruitcakes. Well, when we got off the bus, my 2 buddies reached over and clobbed me on the shoulder and said, "Great idea," because on every corner was a family sitting there selling fruitcakes, and here we were.
Gosh.
Yeah. And so I thought, now what do I do? So being the entrepreneur that I am, I looked down both sides of the street and I saw 2 real tall buildings about 2 blocks away. And I said, come on, guys, let's go down there and let's go talk to the people in those buildings. And now you remember, I'm 8 years old. And so we get down there and I go in the front door and I noticed on the outside on the big plaque, it said Garvey buildings. So I walked in the front door and there was a receptionist sitting there and I pulled out my fruitcake and I had my spill really down because I'd sold so many to houses, So I walked up to her and I said, look, I have these fruitcakes to save Sesame Street. And I said, I know Mr. Garvey is going to want to save Sesame Street. So I'd really like to talk to him. And she said, well, you need to have an appointment with Mr. Garvey to see him. And she kind of snickered. And I said, well, the thing is, I said, I'm out of school. I'm here today. And I know Mr. Garvey would want to know about this. And I said, he would be disappointed if he didn't know about this. And she laughed again. So she makes a phone call and she's calling his personal assistant. And she's kind of turns her back to me and she's holding the phone like this. And she's talking and she's laughing, and I'm thinking, I'm pretty self-conscious about it because I'm only 8 years old. And so she turns back around. She says, Mr. Coleman, you can go in that elevator right there, go to the very top floor. And Angie will be up at the top floor. You just need to talk to Angie and tell her the same thing you just told me. So I'm thinking, all right, so me and my 2 buddies, I felt like we were the Cowardly Lion and the Scarecrow, from the Wizard of Oz, going up the big doors, And so we get up there. I tell Angie the same thing, and Angie goes, just a minute. And she goes through these great big huge doors, and she's going to talk to Mr. Garvey. And I don't know, but she comes back out and she says, Mr. Coleman, you can go in with 1 fruitcake and you can speak to Mr. Garvey. Just have about 5 minutes. So I was thinking, wow, so I go in at these big doors, I slide in. Here he is sitting behind this huge desk with 2 leather chairs across from him. And the city of Wichita is sitting out behind him and out the windows. And so I walked up and I did my pitch with the fruitcake, and it was all that he could do to keep a straight face. So he looks at me and he goes, is this a contest? Pretty smart guy. And I said, yes, sir, it is a contest. And he goes, oh, he said, if you sold a lot of fruitcakes, what would you win? And I told him, well, I'd get this. And he goes, so what does your 2 buddies get? And I said, well, I'm going to give each of them 1 of the bikes. He goes, oh, so you get the $500. And I said, yeah, I'm the main guy. And so he laughed and he said, okay. He goes, well, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. He said, I want you to deliver a fruitcake to every single person in this building. He said, there's about 2,000 people in this building. And I said, really? He goes, yeah. And he said, he flipped around his chair and he said, you see the building next door? And I said, yeah. He goes, that's my brother's building. I want you to, when you get done here, go over there and go up to the top floor and tell him the same story you just told me. Well, guess who took first place?
You did.
I did. Yeah, I won the one. And that was kind of the beginning of my understanding of my ability to think outside the box, push myself, not meet a stranger. And so I was kind of like Dorothy from the Wizard of Oz. I was like, you got to go ask, And
right. You don't ask. You don't know until you ask, right?
Yeah. So anyway, that fits the story of what we're talking about for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. It kind of sounds like, so we had like only 4 boxes of cookies. They like at the end of our little Walmart situation, they're like, okay, these 4 boxes we didn't sell. It was the next troop's time to come in, right? So they had everything we had run out of, they had. So when people would come, they'd be like, I want Thin Mints. So like, oh, we're sold out. But there's these boxes. Yet behind us are these ladies with Thin Mints, right? And so clearly they wanted what they wanted, right?
Right.
So I was like, honestly, there's like 4 boxes a piece. Why don't we each just take the 4 boxes and then try to sell them on our own, right? And so the girls, they're wanting to, sit in front of our house in the driveway. We live in an area, it's like not very busy. I was like, okay, so we sat there I was like, okay, I'll help you set up the table. Like I'm just going with it. We actually have one person stop by. They don't buy anything. They don't have any cash with them. And then I have a dream house that I would like to live in, a neighborhood, right? So we drove to that neighborhood I would like to live in. And we talked to a couple of different, people there. One of the houses we stopped at, the gentleman, kind of like Mr. Right, we said Garvey or Garvey.
Mr. Garvey.
Yeah, Mr. Garvey, right? Kind of like that, right? He was so supportive and he's like, how many more boxes do you have? And I'm like, 4. He's like, we'll take them. How much are they? And I told him, yeah, we'll take them. He's like, make sure you come back next year. We really like gluten-free. I'm like, okay, great. I'm going to go sell you as many gluten-free ones as you want next year.
Yeah. First stop.
Like, before I left, I was like, hey, what do you do? Right. For work, and he goes, oh, we own a business. I said, great. Do you have a business card? So I got his business card so we could contact him and thank him for him and his wife. They both came out to talk to us. So I thanked him for supporting our Girl Scout. And like, you better believe next year I'm going to be like first.
Yeah, no kidding.
Said you wanted gluten-free. How many boxes do you want? Right. So
it's
just
funny. You can meet
awesome.
some cool people while you're selling cookies. That's for sure.
Yeah. And for sure, entrepreneurs that, they understand, right? Like it's definitely entrepreneur supportive, all of that with kids and nonprofits and stuff. So yeah, it's an awesome thing. Yeah, for sure. I do a lot of nonprofit work too. So yeah, I understand all of that. I have worked with a couple of nonprofits and I do an annual volleyball tournament in Kansas City. So kind of a fun thing to do. I like playing volleyball. So yeah.
It's a fun sport. I've got a granddaughter I hope starts playing volleyball. She says she's going to play. She's only 8 years old right now, but she's been playing basketball. But I've been encouraging her to play volleyball because I think it's just a cool sport.
Yeah. And she could do both, right? Because usually the sports don't coincide like one after the other. So she could do both. Yeah.
Yeah. No, she's that type personality. She thinks that she should be able to do everything. And I agree.
Yeah.
I tell her you can just, gotta just manage your time. You can do it all.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, is there anything else you want to share with the listeners? Anything you have I
do have these books that I've written there's 3 of them coming out. I've spent the last 5 years of my life writing these books. One of them is out right now. It's called Focus on the 5, and it's on the number 5, focus on the number 5. And it's based off that principle that 5% of the population are disruptors. They are those people from the age of a child that just have a tendency to go left when everybody else goes right. They're that group that just says, I love challenges. I love to be creative. I love to make things happen. And so I became fascinated by that group over the years and I studied it. And so the book was written. about that group of people. They grow up to be the Elon Musk and presidents, and they're presidents of CEOs of companies because they're just so driven.
Right.
I do find that they have a high level of common sense, and common sense is not always that common. And I equate common sense that comes from someone who has an extremely philanthropy type heart, as well as they're intelligent. And somewhere in between, this common sense falls. And they have both of those to the extreme, and they just put it to use. And then when you take that coupled with someone who just doesn't quit, they're just that mentality of, I have a task I'm going to accomplish and I'm going to go get it done, even if the rest of the world says, that's risky to do, or that doesn't make a lot of sense to do, or that individual just kind of hears that, but they kind of have blinders and they just go do it anyway. And so I have such a passion for that group, and of course I'm that person, but I love that group of people. And so I have a sequel to that book now coming out because it was a bestseller. It was endorsed by 12 billionaires initially. And Les Garland started MTV and VH1, and the owner of Bass Pro, Johnny Morris, and the owner of O'Reilly Automotive. So various people endorsed it. So I was flattered by that. Just a hillbilly out of the Ozarks wrote a book, and to see it so popular. But it's the fascination of that group of people and where they hang out, how to meet them. And guess where you meet them at the most? Non-for-profits. They go to non-for-profits all the time because they usually make a lot of money. And when they make a lot of money, they donate it. And then their free time, they spend at non-for-profits, charities. And it was Johnny. It's became a trend that I've learned is a great thing for business people to tune into. So there's great reward for being a part of charity, but just because you give, but then also you do get back because you meet some of your best people you'll ever meet in your lifetime as far as business connections. And then another book I wrote because of my 45 years in real estate, I closed 6,500 properties over the years and became really good at the industry and because of my passion. So I wrote a book that's coming out. It's called Climb to the Top. And it's how to climb to the top in the real estate industry as a real estate agent or broker, not in the investing side, but in the actual selling real estate. And I had so many people ask me if I would write that book. So I sat down, I just from my heart, I really sat and thought about every little thing that I learned to do as a marketing person and a person that said, I don't believe in sales in the traditional sense. I believe in service. So the book's based around that principle, and that was how I did real estate. And then I have another book coming out that's called The Legend of Table Rock, and it's a kid. Netflix is talking about doing a series on it, and it's a kid that grows up in the Midwest on a lake and living at a resort, and it's his life of growing up during the 70s. In the resort life in the Midwest and growing up on a lake, kind of like the movie Ozarks. That's just real close to where I grew up. So there's that book's going to be out here pretty shortly. It's just a fun book of a kid growing up, 5 growing up in that time period, And then I have the sequel to Focus on the 5 is coming out too, which is dives deeper into what Focus on the 5 is. And I have a Facebook group that you can go to and join and be a part of Fives, which is just called Focus on the 5, Facebook group. And I've had Climb to the Top Facebook group too. So you can come and network with people and meet them. And it's a great place to just communicate, meet with that other like-minded people.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. They always say you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So I feel like it's so true. It's so true. And I love that your book is, the 5%. And now, just me being one of those, but then growing one of those too, right? Helping one grow into who she is. And, I think just having knowledge of that and awareness of that, not all parents do. Right. Yeah. And I think that's a big thing too, is just being aware of it instead of like, she wants to sell 1,000 boxes of cookies and some parents would be like, oh my God, that's too many. I'm not, whatever. And I'm like, okay, great. What's our plan for that? Like,
that's awesome. Well, you being a 5 makes it so much easier to understand where she's coming from. The 2 books are dive deep into how to raise a 5. And because most of the world doesn't know what to do with a 5. Right. When they call them disruptors, and they even want to put them on medication because they're like what's wrong with this child. They don't like to necessarily go by the rules.
Yeah.
And for a five, rules, fives understand rules. They just figure they're written for the other 95% of the world, not for them. They feel like that, you know what, I don't really need rules because I'm the one who's supposed to figure out how to do things different than everybody else. And they
Yeah.
just instinctively that way. It's the craziest thing. The other thing I find out about fives is they all fives come from the place of they are faith driven, all of them. Which is really interesting. I interviewed the 12 billionaires that endorsed the book. I interviewed each one of them, and they all were men of faith, and they all were driven by four primary things: faith, number one; family, number two; their time. They value their time the most beyond the first two things, and then the fourth thing that they valued the most was relationships. They said, Ken, without relationships, life has no meaning. And they said, it's not about the things you acquire, it's about those people you meet along the way. And they said, and then for us, they said, Ken, we love your book so much because what we've learned is that as fives, when we connect with other fives, we flourish. We really, especially when there's people that know you and understand you, that know
Right.
why you function the way you do. So
Right.
yeah, that's become a big passion of mine. I'm driven to go speak around the country. In fact, I speak in California on June 16th in LA. I'll come and do a whole course one day on Focus on the Five, and you can go to kencolemanlive.com and you can see where I'm speaking at next and talking different books and stuff. So
Yeah, that's great, Ken. And I love it because I'm like, I need to go check out that Facebook group, the books, all of that. So yeah. You have an event coming up. Wow, that's like in 3 days in Joplin. Is that still going on?
it is, yes. I've got an event coming up there and getting ready to schedule a lot more. There'll be some in Vegas, Austin, Nashville, and more in California.
Yeah.
So
Well, when you
I'm
come through Missouri, we'll have to connect.
yeah, definitely. You'll have to come
Yeah.
come to one of the events. I
Yeah.
would welcome you to, but it's especially when you're a five, you get it. It actually puts a smile on your face because it's kind of nice to know that you're accepted for who you are and how you're designed by a
Right.
large group of people. So
Yeah.
there's thousands of followers already on the website, Focus on the Five, and it's fun to connect with them because they're just like you. They're people
Right.
that they usually are in business for themselves. They typically don't like to work for somebody else.
Yeah, we don't do well in corporate America.
No. And they also, one of the things that I found that's really in common with other fives have this incredible need to be loved, more so than the average person. But love for a five is being understood. That's their love language, is to simply just be accepted and understood for who they are, because so many people don't. And they don't, and they're kind of like, why do you do what you do? And why do you take those risks or those chances? And, why don't you just act like everybody else does? And it's not your design. You're not supposed to be that way. And so, yeah. And the truth of the matter is fives have a rough time staying married. They have a high level of divorce because of that. They just have a rough time getting people to understand them. And they get bored real easy too, by the way. They when squirrel runs by, they go squirrel. They like to look. Yeah, they're easily distracted. Shiny objects. They love shiny objects.
Yep. We actually, in our community, we have a lot of fives in the community I'm a part of, and I feel like we did a "You Are Loved" campaign and challenge, and it was really good just to share with people. I even have a shirt that says "You Are Loved" on it, with that community, and it was just really nice to see like the difference we were making in that group and helping people, just that self-love and all of those things, and just it was a lot of focus on health, but we also focused on reading too, personal development and that too. So they could pick whatever they wanted to read, as long as it was a personal development type book. It'd be really cool to do a book, like a study group with your book. I should do that.
I love to join. I love to be around. I was at Texas A&M a few months ago, and there was this young girl in a crowd of about 250 students that were graduating and early in the season. And she asked me, she said, Mr. Coleman, she said, how do you know, that you are a five? And I said, well, when you have that feeling in the pit of your stomach as a child, that you're supposed to be a part of something much bigger than yourself, but you just don't know what that is. I said, that's not normal. I mean, if there is such a, well, fives are not normal, and they don't fit in with the other 95% of the population. And I don't think God intended for us to. I think that we're supposed to be that group that pushes the rest of the world to think outside that box, invent things, create things, be the alpha of humanity that steps out and says, hey, well, what if we do this, and what if we do that? Like your daughter who says, well, why can't I sell a whole bunch of cookies?
Right.
She, in her mind, she's just, I think you are born that way. I don't think it's something that you developed and to become.
No.
You're just that way. And just like some people are born tall and some are born short, some are born to be a five. And it's the interesting thing about the book, wrote the book not so much for fives, but for everybody else who's not a five to understand the five. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, trust me. Yeah, that makes sense.
You can relate. Most fives can relate to that. They always laugh because it is hard to understand a five, but other fives, when you're in a room with other fives, and this, you just flourish. There's just it makes you feel good. It makes you have passion for life. It makes you have passion for their ideas, and you have more patience to listen to them and them to you because you get each other.
Right. Absolutely.
Even if you don't agree on everything, it doesn't really matter, as long as they are thinking outside the box and they recognize that. And the other thing too is that because they're all people of faith by their nature, there's this natural connection. And it's not about religion. It's just about that all knowing that there is something out there greater than ourselves. And that's kind of, fives have a tendency to take, I won't call it necessarily risk, but calculated decisions. Focus on the Five book was written about the nature of how we make our choices in life. That's really what it's about. If you think about the Bible in a word is about choices. We can either choose to believe or choose not to believe. And so that's really was a study of that, is how humans make their choices in life. And fives are that group that just steps out and says, hey, I can make a choice. I'm very proud of the fact that I can make a choice. And that may not always be right, but the cool thing is I will learn from it if it isn't right. I won't quit. I'll just say, okay, that didn't work, and I'll go do this. And the rest of the world looks at that and says, well, that's just dumb. Why would you do that? If your hand's going to get burnt, why would you take the risk? And so it is fascinating to learn about fives, especially how to raise one. I'll tell you a funny little story real quick. My two grandsons are my oldest son, who's one of the heads of marketing for Dell Computers in Austin, Texas, and he's got two boys, my two grandsons. And at the age of 6 and 7, he had just got a brand new couch. My son did, and his wife, Emily, and the two boys were jumping over the couch while he was on the phone, and Emily was away from the house. And it was a brand new couch, and they were excited about it, so they were jumping over the back of this couch. And Patrick was beside himself. He could not wait to get off the phone with his boss and pull these two boys over and say, look, we don't jump over the couch. So he did exactly that. Well, after he did that, the phone rang again. He got back on the phone again. One of his sons, the oldest one, sat down, started reading a book. The next one, Garrett couldn't wait to him to back on the phone. He started jumping over the couch again. And so Patrick got off the phone. He just read the book, Focus on the Five, that his dad had written, I'd wrote. And so he said, I'm going to try something here. I think maybe I have a son who's a five. So he pulls both of them back over and he looks at Oscar, the one that sat on the couch, the older one, and he goes, Oscar, what did you hear me say a minute ago about the rules in our house? And he said, well, Dad, you said we don't jump over the couch. And he goes, very good, Oscar. He said, so he looks at Garrett and he goes, Garrett, what did you hear me say? And Garrett's looking at his shoes because he knows he's in trouble. He's looking down at his shoes, and he finally sheepishly looks up at his dad and he goes, am I going to get in trouble? And his dad goes, no, you won't. Just tell me the truth. What did you hear me say? And you're not going to get in any trouble. And so he kind of real quietly, he goes, well, Dad, you said I can't jump over the couch. And he said, see, I can. And that's what a five hears. Fives hear the world differently than the other 95% of the world. They hear things as a challenge. They hear things as, so that's why rules don't apply to fives, because fives are ready to change the rules. They're ready to reinvent the rules. So anyway, it's kind of fun.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I hear that for sure.
Yeah.
Yes. And we just got back from spring break this week. Today's the last day of spring break. They go back to school tomorrow. And so my 4 and 6-year-old, we went to Colorado. So kind of like the rules, right? I'm like, spring break, like I've got business I can do in Colorado. I have family there. I have friends there. I'm going to get out of the house and I'm going to go, right? Everybody's like, right? Everybody else is like, you're going to go by yourself without anybody else in the car? I'm like, the girls are with me, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And they're like, but by yourself? And I'm like, yeah, I can drive a car. Like, if we need to stop, we stop, right? But
Yeah.
it's just interesting, like how the non-5s are like, are you sure? Like, what are you gonna do? And I'm like, if we need something, we can call somebody, right? Like, anyway, so we had the best time, and honestly, they were so well behaved. Like, I feel like they were the best in the car they've ever been on a road trip, right? Like, it's kind of, they knew, right? They kind of knew and had this feeling like, hey, mom is on her own. And I would say a couple times, hey, girls, like, you realize I'm driving. I cannot do X, Y, and Z right now. I'm driving. And they'd be like, okay, yeah, no big deal. But it's just so cool to see how, like, literally the 5, right? My daughter,
Yep.
doing her math homework. She literally like whipped through that thing. Like, she's supposed to do like 1 page a day. I gave it to her to just do 1 page, and she like did all of it, like 20 pages of it.
That's a 5.
I'm like, hey, I am not going to, like put her down at all. Like, I'm just going to be like, okay, great job. You did great. Like, I'm like, there's no reason to rain on her parade, right? She did a great job. And I, showed her like, man, you did so good. Like, you finished all of this. And even her teacher too, we just had a meeting with her teacher the other day, and, just they were complimenting her on, just all the progress she's made, and just that environment and everything too. So
Compliments go a long ways with 5s, because remember, it's their love language is to be understood and accepted for who they are. So when you brag on a 5 and you say, good job, and great that you made the effort, and especially if they make a mistake, with a non-5 that makes a mistake, it's like, oh my gosh, I failed, I goofed up, I messed up. But with a 5, if they make a mistake, what you want to say is what did you learn from it? Because they always learn something from it. They always sit down and analyze what went wrong here. I'm going to take this and turn it into a positive somehow. And if they're, especially if they're encouraged to think that way, 5s definitely will take the bait. They will run with it, and that it just makes them become even better and better. I think that's where, somebody, again, that same girl at Texas A&M, she says, well, how can I read about 5s? And I said, go to any library and check any book out. They're written about 5s. They don't write about 95%ers. They only write about 5s. And she just,
and the book was probably written by a 5 too.
And it was written by a 5. Absolutely. Yeah. I told her, she said, well, you're a very spiritual person. I said, yeah, not really any more than the next person. I said, but I do believe that, there was the man that walked the face of the earth years ago. And I said, when he was put here, I said, there definitely was a feeling in the pit of his stomach. He knew he was supposed to be a part of something much bigger than himself. And I said, and people said, if you go around saying these things that you're preaching about, they're probably going to kill you for it. And he said, well, I can't help it. It's just who I am. I got to do what I was, I got to be who I'm supposed to be. But what he did do is he went and he found him 12 other guys that also were 5s. It was a fisherman and a carpenter. And they all said, you know what? I'm chucking my career to go after this thing that I know is important for me to pursue. And I think the real blueprint, if you will, of all of that is there was another group of people that wrote a book about them. And that group were 5s, because who would have wrote a book about this group, because it was not a popular thing even during that time. And they did. And we wouldn't know their names today if it hadn't been for that group that wrote the book. Right. So I think the lesson there is for 5s is you're supposed to write your book. And because the world learns from 5s. All things in the world are created by 5s. All things in the world are first purchased by 5s. So when you think about that, it's kind of funny, and it puts a smile on your face when you're a 5, but it's not easy being a 5. The life of a 5 is not easy, because we're not understood. And so, it makes it challenging. But at the same time, if you're born to be the 5 that you're born to be, and you're going to pursue that, then you just have to say, you know what, I'm sorry if the rest of the world doesn't get me. I'm going to be who I am. And you as a mother, you understand how important it is to be that role model for the 5 in their life. Yeah. To say, okay, it's okay to be the 5 that I am and live my life and do what I'm supposed to do. So
Yep.
it's pretty cool. You know, I have found when I go out and I speak to people, and a lot of people get real emotional when we start talking about it because it's like they've been given permission. And I was in San
Mhm.
Diego about 2 years ago, and there was an 82-year-old man sitting out in the audience that later came up, spoke to me after the event. And he said, Ken, this so relates to me. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, at 14 years old, I was born in Germany. And he said, I was living in Germany. And he said, I knew that I was supposed to become a part of something much bigger than myself. And he said, but I didn't know how I was going to do it. Because back in this day, if you were somebody who invented things and put things together, Germany would come and take you away from your family and put you somewhere else. And they would, in an incubator to have you invent things. And he said, so I asked my grandfather, what can I do about this? And his grandfather said, well, he said, your dad's not going to like this, but you need to get out of here. You need to get away from here to be who you are. So 2 nights later, he took a scaffolding hook from underneath his father's bed with a rope, threw it over the Berlin Wall, climbed the wall, and they were shooting at him. And the concrete chips hit his legs and cut into his legs. He went over the wall, ran for 2 days, got to a ship, climbed up the rope of the ship into the anchor part of the boat, lived in that boat for 2 weeks, and ended up coming into the New York harbor. Couldn't speak a word of English. And I said, let's cut forward. I said, what happened to your life? And he said, well, I just retired the head of NASA. And he said, I would have never had that opportunity had I not left and came to the United States and to be a first generation immigrant. And he said, Ken, he goes, it's so true what you're saying. He goes, fives are born all over the world, but they don't always get permission to be the five they were born to be. And I think it's more so with women than it is for men. Because
absolutely.
Yeah, they're stereotyped, and we still have that problem in our own country. But in other worlds, it's just incredible. And suicide rates very high for females in other countries that are fives that are not allowed to be the five they were born to be. And it's really sad. But so anyway, I really encourage parents to think outside the box and say, okay, maybe my child's a five, even though they're a disruptor in class, maybe that's a really good thing. Maybe they're the next president of the United States or, something even greater.
Yeah. Madison's, my oldest, is going to be in a musical next week. And so they got to, it's all like spring themed, right? So they could be flowers, they could be ladybugs, they could be all these things, right? Spring related. And so I asked Madison what she was going to be. And she goes, I'm going to be a weed. And I was like, okay. Was not listed on the teacher's email, right? I was like, okay, well, we have a costume for a ladybug. We have a costume for a bumblebee. Do you want to be one of those? No, I want to be a weed. I was like, okay. Her teacher emailed and said, I understand your student wants to be a weed. I've literally all you need to do is get a shirt that's green. I've got a camo vest already. Apparently she's not the first weed that's ever wanted to be a weed. And then I listened to the song Game, and one of the songs is Weeds Are Cool. And I'm like, maybe that was part of her thought process there. But I just thought it was really, really interesting.
But her willingness to venture out and do it, just on a suggestion, it's not normal, Mom, just so you know.
I know. Yeah. I just think it's so cool because she was a child who was very shy. I mean, I remember probably back in preschool, I think my husband had to go stand up on stage with her for her first performance because she wouldn't stay up there otherwise. So he just went and sat with her and she stayed up there. And so anyway, I just love that she's getting out of her shell, and then she wants to, like, literally she's going to be standing out because everybody else is going to be, their thing. And, so I'm like, hey, it's good, right? Like, I'm embracing it even more. So
it would be a fun life to follow because the lives of fives, in watching them blossom and come from shyness to, I was a very shy kid when I was young, and now I'm out speaking and doing other things, but I've learned to push myself, learned to not accept status quo or mediocre. And even though it was uncomfortable, I always had to kind of push myself and say, okay, if others can do this, surely I can do it as well.
Right.
When we have a number of people who's writing their books now, that we call them legacy series, focus on the 5 books. And there's a number of people around the United States that are writing them. And when they write them, we encourage them to write them based off this principle. If a young child come running in, say, to a store, and let's say a young girl version, a little girl looks a lot like you, and she runs in, and you can see her with all this crowd. She runs right straight to you. She jumps up in your arms, and she grabs both your ears, and she looks you right in the eye and puts her nose right to your nose. And she says, would you do me a favor and write a book about a better version of how you lived your life? And so that's the books that we ask for people to write, is to write to that small child. And of course, that child's you. So you would be writing that book to that person, and you certainly can relate to that with two daughters. But I do believe that we are given a gift in life as fives, especially, and that is to live this life as a five, which means that we're going to push the envelope. We're always going to be doing more than the average person. And we need to write about that. That's what the Bible was about. It was about writing about these 12 people, 13 people. And I believe that's our task in this world, is to leave that behind. Podcast is a good way of doing that, what you're doing right now. But I would certainly encourage fives that are listening to write their own book, their own version. That wisdom is very important to pass on to the next generation, especially of fives, so that they're told it's okay to be the five that they are.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm working on my second book. It's interesting that I feel like you're being used like as a vessel for that message.
I definitely think that's coming from there.
Get on it, right?
Yeah. Well,
Some more time on it.
I think that I always share that with fives, because I do believe that God wants us to write that book. I think that that is a great gift that we're given, to learn this wisdom. And it is wisdom. I mean, to be given two great children like you have, and the life that you've lived. And so for years and years, I sold real estate in Southwest Missouri, which was a tremendous amount of retirees. And I had like 6,000 retirees from all over the United States, California and Boston and Florida. They would come to live there on the lakes. And I saw one big, huge common denominator is they would pass away, thousands of them. Of course, I got to watch pass away from the age of 19 growing up. And I would hear their families stand there at the funeral and say, gee, if I just had 10% of the knowledge mom did, or 10% of the knowledge dad did. And I would think to myself, what a waste that they didn't write that down. Whether it was recipes or how to be an attorney or whatever it was that they were inspired to write to that next generation. I think they need to write that, because it's so valuable information, even though we think that, oh, that's just about me. It's not that big a deal. Nobody really wants to hear about that. What you have to understand as a five is that 95% of the world cannot relate, and they love to read about fives. But even though they're not one, because they may be, even though they're not a five, they may be raising a five, and they're thinking, I have no clue how to raise this kid. And so your book will inspire that. So I encourage you and your listeners to write their books. Definitely.
Yes, absolutely. And just to work with people, right? Because, whether it's in a household, relationships, work relationships, customers, marketing, like whatever it is, you're working with fives, but you're also working with the 95ers too. So it's that, like, who are you getting your message to, and how do you, just how can you help others too? And just that empowering freedom are the two words describing the best, but it's impacting, empowering lives. And it's interesting for that. And I have a specific number with that. And I'm like, maybe that's because it's a five thing, right? Like, it's not everybody, right? It's that 5%.
Have you ever spoke to a large group of people and stood there and you're thinking, there's a certain number of people out here that's really connecting with me, and the rest of them just got that deer in the headlight look?
Right.
Well, the reality is they're never going to connect with you, because they can't. They cannot relate to the way you make choices or the way you think, because they're not a five. But the five are connecting with you, and they're almost completing your sentences. They get you so well. And that's the reason, because they are designed the same way that you are, in that they are overachievers and they're disruptors, not necessarily in a negative way.
Right.
Quite the opposite, actually. But the rest of the world calls them disruptors.
Right.
Yeah. One of the things too that the book talks about is that there is two tribes of fives when they're born. 20% of the world is born as a progressive true five. That means that they make their choices and decisions based off of risk. In other words, they just like that, make it a choice or decision, and they'll take whatever the consequences are. 80% of the world are born conservative. fives, which means that they make their choices and decisions very calculated, but they still make their own choices and their own decisions. And they still are out of the box thinkers. They still have a lot of the same attributes. Just one big, huge difference is there's this line drawn in the sand that literally they're either progressive or they're conservative, not like in the political world, but just literally every sense of the word.
Right.
They're just, they make their choices based off of being careful about what they say and what they do, but they are their own person and they are a leader of their group. So they and most of your CEOs come from the conservative side. And most of your inventors, the entrepreneurs, the true high level entrepreneurs like Elon Musk are in the progressive side. And it's not good or bad to be either one or the other. It's just that there is that top 5% in each group that push themselves and do all the things we've talked about. There's your fives. That's your true fives. And there is two different types. The book dives deep into that, talks about that, breaks it down by the nature of how, and it was endorsed also by one of the top psychologists in the world, who was the guy who also marketed DNA to the United States. He loved the book and he hands it out to all the students when he teaches now. He's a professor at Texas University. So that was a real compliment. Yeah.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely. Yeah, that's great.
Especially from an old hillbilly, that what do I know?
Well, yeah, I must be a hillbilly too. I grew up in Missouri and then I moved to Kansas, which was like, I mean, I think it's a little bit less hillbilly. Sometimes you see a little difference. I think it's mostly by homeowners associations. Other than that, like, it's interesting. But man, Ken, this was such a great conversation. Well,
it's fun. I always love talking to another five. And
well, I think that's the deal, right? Like it just time goes by with a five, right? It
does. Yeah, you never get tired of it. Well, there's another thing that's coming out here pretty soon that you can kind of check on. It's called lifestyle equity. It's an invention that I came up with because of all of my years in real estate. And it's a new way of owning homes. It's getting ready to come across the market. We're going to do a lot of them here in California, Texas, Florida, Missouri, and a lot of other areas. And simply what it is, lifestyle equity is right now, there's only two ways that you can actually occupy a home. You either rent a home or you buy a home. Well, the problem is less and less people are able to buy a home. And people are being forced to rent a home. Well, the problem is when you look at the overall economy, if you don't put back equity of some kind into a home from the largest payment you pay every month, then how are you ever going to retire? So my passion was to solve that problem. So I invented an idea that's called lifestyle equity. That's where you rent a home, brand new house, and then 10% of your payment comes back to you in stock in all the houses that we build. So your equity actually increases and you can pull from that equity, you can spend that equity, you can retire with that equity. And you'll hear a lot about it in the future, but it's called lifestyle equity. And it was invented by God, but it was used as a vessel to do that. And a very wealthy group of people are backing it and they're going to support it. So you're going to be hearing about it. It's called lifestyle equity. And
awesome. That's great.
So Cass is the first one to hear about it, by the way. So
yeah, well, very cool. Well, thanks for sharing with us.
Yeah, thank you.
It's fun. And a way to go, like, seriously, like there's entrepreneurs out there, there's people that have ideas, inventions, and they don't take action on it, and it takes work, it takes time, it takes sweat equity, right? Some people those 95%ers don't quite ever get it. And so way to, have that download from God and just, move forward with it.
Yeah, our biggest obstacles as true fives and entrepreneurs is ourselves. It's not other people. We've learned to put on blinders. We've learned that group's going to be out there and they're going to doubt everything that we do. So our biggest obstacle becomes the need to be loved so much and accepted as a five that we want the rest of the world to kind of accept us. So it's kind of funny. It's a catch-22. We want to be accepted. And so we have a tendency to question things then. We begin to go, okay, well, maybe they're right because there's so many people that I want to be loved by that says to me, you probably shouldn't do that. You should, not take that risk, not take that chance. And so you put on the brakes a little bit and that we become our own hurdle at that point. And so I would encourage that entrepreneurs, you're born to be an entrepreneur. If you're born to be a five, it down deep, and just be that person. And yes, you're going to make mistakes. Guess what?
Oh yeah.
You're supposed to
What'd you
make
learn?
mistakes. Yeah.
Right.
They're really not mistakes to a 5. They're just hurdles.
Right.
That's all they are. And
Right.
hurdles, you go either go around them or through them or over them, but just don't quit. Just keep going. And you'll
Right.
get there. You'll always get there. Just keep going.
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
that comes from God. God wants us. He puts those ideas in us for a reason.
Right.
And he knows that he knows that you as a 5 are going to pursue it and make it happen. So that's the reason why you chose to be that person. I believe at birth.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yes. Yes. All right. Well, this was exciting. Thank you so much, Ken. This was a great
Thank
surprise.
you.
It's always so fun to interview people and have them on the podcast, but it was a complete delight to have you on tonight. And
Well, you're kind. I appreciate it. Well, it was a great interview. I appreciate doing it.
Yeah, I'm excited. We can meet in person because you're coming to the Midwest. So
That's right. Yeah. Well, me too.
Yeah.
Well, I know that Michelle is the reason I'm out here in LA. Michelle's my girlfriend, and we met online. Yeah. Very unique story, and she's an extreme 5 herself. So you'll get a chance to meet her, but
yeah, she coming with you when you come to the Midwest?
She is, yes. Yeah.
Awesome. Good. Yeah. I got to talk with her today. She was such a delight. So I can't wait to meet her too. So all right. Well, everybody check out Ken Coleman online. Check out his events if you're in the Midwest and California, on his podcast. What is the name of your podcast?
It's Focus on the 5. Focus on the 5
Focus
podcast.
On the 5.
And then the Ken Coleman Live. If you go to kencolemanlive.com, you can find out about anything I'm doing.
Okay, perfect. Awesome, Ken. Thank you so much. Have a great night.
Thank you. You too.